Welcome to week 2 of Decoding Art. I'm Barry McGrill, your instructor. This little video is meant to get us started in a discussion when we meet in Zoom. In the whole study of Western art history, there have been very few opportunities to see an artist at work. We typically only see the finished product. In fact, some artists were pretty secretive about their process, including Da Vinci, who you may know wrote notes backwards to prevent others from stealing his ideas, and even Rembrandt, though he had many students in his school, he probably didn't teach them everything that he knew. There is an exception, however, and that is Michelangelo's slaves. They're 4 sculptures of the male figure intended for the tomb of Pope Julius II. Now, it's important to note that these were commissioned in 1505, just 1 year before the discovery of the Laocoon group, but Michelangelo hadn't started on this tomb until several years later. And of course, the entire thing was never completed. Only parts of it, such as the slaves that we're looking at here. They were meant to be a very small part of this massive tomb for Pope Julian that, as we know, remains unfinished. Because it's unfinished, we can actually see the hammer and the claw marks on the sculptures themselves. So more importantly, what we see is the sculptor's process, such that he began in the front and carved as though he was revealing what was already in the stone. In fact, Michelangelo believed that an artist was a gift from God, meant to reveal beauty that the divine had already placed on earth. Now, that sits very well with the Catholic Church's doctrine, of course, so there was a pretty happy marriage there. So Michelangelo, in his artistic practice, proceeded from the front of the block of stone with the intention of finishing parts of the body while other parts were barely begun. So we can see that some parts toward the front are finished, while of course toward the back he's barely started. This was actually a very atypical way of carving, since most sculptors created a plaster cast first and used it to measure where they would chip away from the raw stone, and then only finishing the whole body at the end. Michelangelo instead carved mostly freehand. The result is that the bodies of the slaves appear to be wrestling with the stone from which they are carved, as if they're trying to will themselves into existence. That's how we see it, but not necessarily was that how Michelangelo intended it. As a viewer, we can feel them struggle, the weight of the stone that holds them in place, as a metaphor for the struggle of our own lives. And that's why I think these sculptures continue to resonate even with the general public, even though they were intended for a pope, the grandest of all popes, Pope Julius II, who envisioned a 2-story tomb for himself after he passed. It's also worth noting that Michelangelo is to sculpture what Mozart was to music. Apparently Mozart could just compose as though he was writing a letter to someone freely, without having to make corrections or changes, at least if the movie Amadeus is true. Michelangelo was doing the same thing. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do with marble, because marble, a big marble slab, say life-size marble slab, has embedded in it, inside that slab, flaws and little fissures that you can't see from the outside. So as you're carving away and planning, let's say, where an arm is going to show up, you may run into a big crack, and it will prevent you from completing the sculpture in the way that you wanted. So the story goes is that Michelangelo, when he would get a block of stone, would go directly to the quarry and not let anyone pick it for him. He would pick the block of stone himself. And that meant he was able to survey the stone itself, where it came from, whether or not there were any fissures leading into that block that he would not have seen if it had just been delivered to his door. So with this set of sculptures, we really get to see the artistic practice, which leads us more deeply into knowing and being able to talk about this week what's going on in the mind of an artist.